In West Africa, um, which we're kind of covering right now, there's some interesting aspects here in thinking about the shift from the slave trade into Western intervention, putting itself in a different way into Africa. So Sierra Leone, also very much known now for the diamond industry and some of the tragedy that's because of that. But so 1787, British abolitionists founded a settlement called Freetown. In other words, abolitionists against slavery. Okay. 1808, a year after this, the British Parliament banned slave trade, and their navy was used as a base to stop trade. Now, but think about this. So the British now, who were then once participants in the slave trade, ban it, and they do this efficiently by now setting up a naval post within this area. Now they free captives resettled in there, and then there's a mixture of African cultures and implantation of British culture. And there's much work done by the Anglican Church to influence this. Now, again, I want to return to something kind of interesting about the way that the slave trade is banned and a kind of escalation of British colonialism into Africa. And I'm going to state something that is very political and is debatable. So I just want you to kind of like think about this. And I have many friends and former students that were a part of the wars in Iraq, and it's a very sensitive subject. So I just want to like acknowledge that and respect that as a very like sensitive subject, especially for veterans. I merely want to just bring up Iraq to say that when Bush went in there, he called it Operation Iraqi Freedom. He didn't say, this is to secure oil or to assure American dominance. You don't see an American leader ever talk like that. And many people would argue that, in fact, Bush was wanting a war to liberate Iraq. And many people say there's no way. Now, I'm not getting involved with that. I just wanted to merely point out that in the West, there's been a long-standing tradition that you have to go into another country based on having a moral high ground, as opposed to just doing it to dominate for dominance sake. Can you imagine any political leader saying, we're going into Iraq or Liberia, to Libya, Syria, simply to show everybody that we are an imperial power? British really didn't do that either. Like Rome would have done, would have tried that kind of avenue, maybe for the power, just for the glory of Rome. It's not how we operate officially and rhetorically. But the big question is do we see that there's a real concern about the conditions of blacks? Or did the imperial ambitions switch here in Africa, and the anti-slavery thing was used as an excuse to remain having a British foothold into Africa? This is the way some African nationalists would look at it, and other people that would be considered on the far left of the political spectrum. Same thing with Iraq. Now, I have a student in my class that is a war veteran, a Marine, went to Iraq, and he said, and I've heard of some other people, as a historian I don't know, that originally it was called Operation Iraqi Liberation, but the acronym is OIL. Now, if that's true or not, there's a cynicism about whether or not what we say what we're doing something for is really what we're doing it for. Even from patriotic people, from soldiers, no matter what aspect of American society, there's this big question about how the official rhetoric historically that's being used lines up with actually the intent or the reasons why certain things are taking place. And that is always a challenge for historians to deal with. And I want you to kind of like think about that, to absorb this idea of the official histories that are told by, let's say, politicians as to why certain things happen or are being done, and then the other possible motivating factors. Okay, that's all I really wanted to talk about there. So now we move on to Liberia. Liberia is very interesting. So in 1821, the American Colonization Society acquired land in Africa. They were against colonization. Well, let me rephrase this. They were against slavery, and they felt that they needed to send all black Africans back to Africa and have them colonize, like recolonize almost. So the first settlers arrived a year later, and they founded a town called Monrovia, and it would become its capital. Monrovia, as in Monroe, the U.S. president. It was named after. Very strange, Liberia. This was governed for decades by the American Colonization Society. It was proclaimed independence in 1847, shortly before the escalation of violence that would lead to the U.S. Civil War over slavery was going to take place. Their constitution is modeled on the U.S., and the first president, John Jenkins Roberts, was a freeborn black American slave from Virginia. And I don't have a picture of him here, but he kind of dressed almost like a Washington-like character. So I bet a lot of you didn't know that Liberia was or is the creation of an American project, right? And intertwined in with the anti-slavery position. They also had their first female president recently, which America hasn't had in recent decades. So, all right, Zanzibar. There's an island that is in the east, and I'm going to use it. I'll start the next lecture with this one. Okay.